Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. I'm your host, Michael Lofton, joined by co-host William Albrecht and guest Rick Delano, the writer, producer, and narrator also of the end of Quantum Reality. How are you, Rick? It's great to have you on.
Well, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, Michael and William. Great to see you.
I'm glad that we had this opportunity to have you on for this show. I actually wanted to have you on a while back when I saw that you were working on the principle. And in fact, I watched some of your interviews with Michael Vorse, and I found what you and Dr. Singenis were saying. I found it absolutely fascinating. So I thought, man, this would be a great person to have a conversation with one day. So again,
Yeah,
glad to have you here.
I saw your interview with Bob Sangenis. I thought it was fantastic.
That was a really fun one. I want to have him on again. Now, we're talking here about your documentary, again, The End of Quantum Reality. Can you first of all tell us a little bit about it? What is the major premise behind it? What's the purpose?
Sure.
And then also, when is the release date?
Okay. Well, I'll answer the last question first. We had our theatrical release in about, I think we ended up in 15 cities back in January. And then COVID-19 came along and sort of interrupted that particular expression. We released the film on digital on May the 13th. Okay. And it is just going gangbusters, man. I mean, I can't even believe we've sold into 36 countries already.
Oh, wow.
We were the #1 best-selling faith and spirituality title on Amazon and DVDs. It was just quite remarkable, the response that we've had so far. And very soon now, perhaps within the next week, we'll be getting up on the big mainstream digital channels, Amazon, Google, iTunes. And so, it's going very well. So that answers that.
Excellent.
Now, basically what the film is a documentary examination of the life and work of a profound genius by the name of Dr. Wolfgang Smith. And I encountered the work of Dr. Smith while I was doing the research for the principle. And he was very interesting to me because here's a guy who, his background is just remarkable. I mean, here's a guy who at 18 years of age graduated from Cornell University with degrees in mathematics, physics, and philosophy, had his graduate degree in quantum mechanics by the time he was 20, had his PhD in mathematics, and was teaching at MIT in his mid-20s. And he was praising Dr. Sangenis's book on geocentrism. And now that's not something you see every day out there.
Right.
And so he was sort of a legendary figure, and everybody had heard of him, but nobody knew where he was or even if he was still alive. So after we were done with the principle, it made sense to me that the next film should examine the world at the other extreme. The principle deals with the cosmology, the world in its very largest scale, galaxies and the universe on its largest scale. That's what we examine in the principle. Then the other place where physics is really starting to run into some serious problems is at the other end of the scale, in the immeasurably small, in the world of quantum physics or quantum mechanics. And I knew that Wolfgang Smith had written an absolutely stunning book back in the 90s called The Quantum Enigma. And long story short, I decided one day to figure out if there was any way that he was still with us. Was he still alive? Or, was he, what was... So I got the brilliant idea of calling up his publisher in New York, right? And of course, Wolfgang had retired 10 years before. He had said to his publisher, I don't want to do any more. I'm hanging up my shingle and I'm going to retire with my beautiful wife in California, and that's that. But because the publisher had seen the principle, he put me in touch with Wolfgang. And Wolfgang had seen the principle. And so a very strong friendship developed. And long story short, I spent almost a year and a half reading every one of his books and speaking with him on the phone for hours at a time. And it became absolutely clear to me that what we have here is a world historical genius his breakthrough is so profound that it may be 40 years or longer before the real implications of what this man has accomplished are generally recognized. And as a documentarian, the poor man was about to have his 90th birthday, and his wife died. And I knew that it was now or never. Either I get this guy on camera, or nobody ever will. And thanks be to God, we were able to get him on camera. And once that first interview had been conducted, everything fell in place. The funding showed up, and we were able to make the film The End of Quantum.
And talking about the funding behind it, it had to be really good funding because the production is amazing. I mean, it really is well done. So I really want to compliment you there.
Well, thank you very much. I must hand it to my director, K.T. Thomas, who also directed the principal.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
K.T. is just brilliant at this. She knows how to take $1 and spend it so it looks like 20, and has been at the very cutting edge of all of the latest. You know, we couldn't have made this film even 5 years ago.
I mean, the special effects are done very, very well. I do some video editing. I'm just thinking, wow, man, this is top notch stuff.
That was Buff, the same people who did the absolutely legendary graphics and animations for the principal.
Yeah.
And of course, we didn't have anywhere near the same amount of money we had for the principal, but technology marches on. You know, what you can do for $1 every 5 years sort of goes way up.
Yeah.
So just because of the excellence of the team, and I must say a big part of it is that the team fell in love with the project early on. You know, most of these people are not Catholics. You know, they're young people, technicians and artists who work and live in Hollywood. The very last people in the world you would expect to pour out their love and their blood. They all fell in love with Wolfgang, and they all fell in love with the project. And I firmly believe that it is that love and that commitment that really puts the shine on this film.
And I'm glad you focused on his work. I had never heard of him before seeing the documentary, but I mean, looking at his credentials, goodness, he's an expert in physics, mathematics, and then philosophy. I mean, he's really well rounded. So I mean, this is a guy.
He's one of a kind, man.
Yeah, absolutely. He's in a perfect position to be able to determine what is going on in the scientific world, because, you know, a lot of scientists try to pull rank and just say, well, you know, you're not an expert here, so you don't understand this. You're just a philosopher and a theologian. You don't understand. Well, he's all of the above. So he's in a position to be able to know when somebody is, you know, trying to pull rank here.
As another scientist in the film, Hossein Nasser, said, I wasn't going to be rolled by anybody.
Right. Exactly.
And, it's very hard to roll Wolfgang Smith because by the time he was 20 years old, he had a graduate degree in quantum mechanics. So, you know,
and from prestigious locations. His
undergraduates were from Cornell. His graduate was from Purdue. His PhD in mathematics was from Columbia University. He's taught at MIT, UCLA, Oregon State for decades.
Yeah,
his credentials are pretty bulletproof.
Oh no, absolutely. Now, y'all talk in the documentary about Quantum Enigma. Now, look, I'm a theologian. I don't really know I know what quantum physics is, just as far as very, very basics. I don't know what the quantum enigma is. So for us who are not familiar with this, what exactly is the quantum enigma that you're discussing?
Quantum enigma is a profound thing. It states, essentially, that the most precise and accurate physics the world has ever known, quantum mechanics, which has never failed an experimental test over 100 years. It's the reason we can have this conversation today while we have computers, and you know, it is a profoundly accurate physics, and its mathematics are an absolute triumph of the human mind. And everything seems to work absolutely perfectly, except for one thing. You can describe a quantum system, whether it's a photon or a group of photons or electron, whatever you want to describe. You can describe that system with stunning accuracy by using either the Schrodinger wave equation or the Heisenberg matrix, or there are several formulations, but they all are mathematically essentially equivalent. And they all are based on a freaking weird thing. And that freaking weird thing is that under the mathematics of quantum mechanics, that particle does not have a location. It does not have a velocity. It does not have a spin. It does not have all of the things that, like when you shoot a cannonball, right? Now that cannonball has a definite velocity all the way over to where it lands on the enemy. You can calculate its position. You can do a differential equation that will tell you exactly how that cannonball is going to fly given this much force and this much elevation. It's there every step of the way, right? Quantum physics is not like that. It turns out that these fundamental particles down at the bottom of the world that science spent 400 years looking for, they don't exist. We think of them in terms of hard little particles that bounce off of each other and are described like Newtonian cannonballs. That's wrong. If that were true, we wouldn't have this conversation today. There wouldn't be the kind of communication networks and technologies that we have today. Because quantum mechanics works so well because it allows the particles to be in many places at once. The mathematics are very clear. The particle can be here, and it can be there, and it can be here, and it can be there, and all at once. They call it superposition. It is spooky. It is weird. We can't understand it in terms of our conceptions of our world, but it works. It works so profoundly. It works to orders of magnitude higher precision than any physics that we have ever had before, until one thing happens. Now, if you shoot a photon out of a photon emitter and you let it go through, like a plate with two slits cut into it, right? And you allow that photon to pass through one of the two slits and then hit like a detector on the other side, whether that's a wall or a photographic plate or whatever detector you want, photovoltaic meter, whatever. Until that photon hits that measuring device, there is no location, there is no velocity, there's merely a cloud of probabilities. There's just a bunch of potentials there. You cannot say where it is, how fast it's going, until you measure it. And then once you measure it, the strangest thing happens. The very instant you measure it, this cloud of probabilities collapses instantaneously down to one specific location on that photographic plate. All of a sudden, it's not a cloud of probabilities. It's a specific dot in a specific location, or it's a specific speed. All of these things are so weird because until you measured it, it had no location. The more you know its location, the less you can know its velocity. All you can know it as is a cloud of probabilities. Or, for the theologians out there, what St. Thomas used to call potentiae.
Okay.
Potentiae, this is the old medieval and Aristotelian concept of matter. When we hear matter, we think we're talking about this wood here. We think we're talking about this plastic here. No.
Right.
In the traditional schools of wisdom, matter was a principle of receptivity. And the matter was impossible to have existence apart from a substantial form.
Right.
So matter was always in potentiality to substantial form. Matter plus form, that gives us the table. That gives us the plastic. That gives us the world. And this was absolutely thrown out baby and bathwater at the beginning of the scientific age.
Sure.
Because Newton said, no, this whole substantial form thing is just, it's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. What the world really consists in is these hard little fundamental particles. Call them atoms, call them whatever you want. But down at the bottom of the world, there's these hard little particles, and they're going to bounce off each other, and there's going to be forces of attraction and this and that. And once you understand the forces of attraction and the composition and the behavior of these particles, you will be able to understand the entire world. There are no substantial forms, and matter is, in fact, these hard little balls. That is essentially the scientific revolution in a nutshell. The entirety of the modern world comes into existence once physics starts to look at the world that way. And boy, did it ever work like a charm for about 300 years. For about 300 years, they were so sure they had this figured out that literally people would laugh at the idea that theology or metaphysics or philosophy would have anything to tell us about the world. I mean, you look at Stephen Hawking, he scorns philosophy. Philosophy is obsolete because now we have science. Well, the joke turned to be on them. And it took Wolfgang Smith to really drive this home, because the hints are present in Werner Heisenberg. Werner Heisenberg was the very first human being to mathematically formulate quantum physics, quantum mechanics. And his father was a classicist. Wolfgang tells me that Werner Heisenberg's father read Plato in Greek. And therefore it is quite likely that Werner Heisenberg read Plato in Greek and was quite familiar with Aristotle and with the medieval schools of metaphysics and philosophy. And what Heisenberg, the great genius breakthrough of Heisenberg, was he said, the more I think about this, about these experiments that are showing light is both a particle and a wave, how can that be? That particles can be in multiple places at one time, how can that be? It suddenly hit him. You know what? The quantum stuff, the quantum particles, remind me of a quantitative version of the old idea of Aristotelian potentia. And he said, wow. So in that case, they are potentia. They don't actually exist. They are in potential to existence.
Yeah.
And then the instant that you measure them, you actualize. They go from potency to act. In other words, the measurement is what actualizes the potentia. That was the great breakthrough that allowed him to formulate quantum mechanics, and that is the great breakthrough that allowed Wolfgang Smith to resolve the quantum enigma, which is, why does our mathematics describe quantum systems perfectly until they're measured? And why is it that our world, if it's truly made up of quantum particles, why don't you multi-locate? Why isn't this microwave oven in 17,000 different places? Why don't we multi-locate? Because it's two very different worlds. The world of the physicist and the world in which we live and move and have our being are two drastically different worlds. And the question is, why? And that is the quantum enigma.
Now, so what you're saying is this particle, before it's measured, it is in potency. It does not have substantial form. Whenever we measure it, that's when it receives substantial form. Now, to me, the only way that could happen is God gives it substantial form at that moment.
Well,
is that
interaction? What happens in a measurement, right, is that the quantum system always comes into contact with what? A measuring device.
Sure.
And what does the measuring device have that the quantum system doesn't? A substantial form. So the quantum system comes into contact with and interacts with an object that has substance, right? That has being. And the interaction of the quantum system with the detector yields a result. The needle points here and
Mm-hmm.
not there.
Mm-hmm.
Under the quantum mechanics, it should point in all kinds of different places at once, but it doesn't. It points in one specific direction. There's one specific dot on that photographic plate. There's one specific track in that cloud chamber. What measurement always does is it takes that cloud of probabilities that are the potentiae and
Mm-hmm.
collapses them instantaneously down to a specific value, a specific location, a specific velocity, a specific track in a cloud chamber. That is only accomplished by bringing the quantum potentiae into contact with a substantial form in a detector. And it's that interaction between the detector, which has substance, and the quantum system, which does not have substance. The quantum system is taken up into the substance, the detector, the thing that has being, and the interaction leaves a result in the form of a needle position or a track in a cloud chamber. All of a sudden, it has being, it has existence, and it is that strange transition. They call it the measuring problem, and it is the central mystery of quantum mechanics. And everyone has tried to resolve this from the bottom up. You know, well, if there's this wave function, why should it collapse? I mean, if the detector is made out of quantum particles, Mike, then the Schrodinger equation should describe that detector just as well as it describes the atom that's coming into contact with it. It doesn't. Something happens. There's an immediate break in quantum mechanics when you measure something. The instantaneous collapse of that wave function is the greatest mystery in all of quantum mechanics. And it can't be resolved from the bottom up. This is Wolfgang's great discovery. What is happening is the only thing we know of in all of physics that is instantaneous. There is, they do these experiments where they'll send entangled particles off thousands of miles away from each other, right? And when they measure one, the other one is instantly determined way faster than the speed of light. I mean, it's not even close. It's thousands upon thousands of times faster than the speed of light. It's actually immeasurably fast. And if we look at this metaphysically, we understand that it is in fact instantaneous. This is completely contrary to what physics, especially Einstein physics, has told us about the world. So Wolfgang looked at this and said, what if the causality is coming from above? Mm-hmm. What if the reason that this is an instantaneous discontinuity is that a higher form of causality is at work here? That in fact the world does not reduce to quantum particles. That quantum particles need something more in order to become that table or that measuring device. And that was the key that broke it wide open. Because the discovery of vertical causality is, first of all, it's the end of the road for the materialists. They will never have their theory of everything. They can pursue it for another 300 years if we'll give them the money. But that's not likely to happen because, gentlemen, with the results of the Large Hadron Collider and the recent cosmology surveys, the world story of the Big Bang is at a dead end. They're dead. They have a lot of prestige, a lot of power, and a lot of money to circle the wagons and maintain their position for a while. But experimentally, the results are already in. Particle physics is at an absolute dead end. They have quantum physics on one side, they have general relativity on the other, and the contradictions between the two are vast. And they can't resolve them. They can't make the two marry up. So we are at a critical moment in history, very comparable in many ways, to the moment where Newton stepped up and destroyed the Catholic cosmology, the geocentric cosmology of the Catholic world. Newton stepped up and just demolished that with his idea that the world reduces to particles and forces. That worked brilliantly for 300 years. Then along comes quantum mechanics. Guess what? The shoe is now entirely on the other foot. And we are in a position to restore that hierarchical sense of the world that doesn't reduce to formulas and physics and particles, that world that includes substance, textures, colors, justice, love, honor. These are things that don't reduce to neurons in our pathway. There is a world above the world of the physicist, and that world is now, frankly, shrieking at us every time we measure a quantum system.
Now, maybe forgive me for not understanding this part. If you already explained it, I apologize. That when we talk about, the particle being in potency, and it doesn't actually have any particular location because it doesn't have substantial form at that moment because it hasn't been measured. How do we know that that's the case without actually measuring to know that it's in multiple places and so on?
That's a great question, and here's the answer. There's no other way to mathematically treat the particle and get the right answer. In other words, quantum mechanics was the least welcome development in the history of physics. Nobody liked it. Nobody could believe that the world was actually this way. I mean, good heavens, it's like throwing 300 years of physics out the window. You're going to throw Isaac Newton out the window? Are you crazy? They did it because they had no choice. You say, how can we know?
Yeah.
Well, the experiments show it. For example, I take a plate with two slits in it. I have a photon emitter, and I have a screen on the back that's going to detect every impact. Now, if I shoot those photons through one at a time, right? If you shoot enough of them over time, you're going to get the exact same pattern on that detector that you would get if it was a wave. But you're not shooting waves, you're shooting individual photons. How in the world do you get the same interference pattern as if you were shooting a wave in there? These are the kinds of experimental absolute mysteries that were confronting the physicists. Now, the great genius Heisenberg ultimately said, you know what? If I'm going to explain this, I have to let go of every preconception I have about what physics is, about what matter is. I have to let the experiments tell me what is going on, and then I have to find a way to mathematically describe these experiments. If I do that, then physics can continue. If I don't do that, physics is finished, because it just doesn't. If we assume that there are hard little particles down there and they follow trajectories like cannonballs, you can't explain the experiments. That theory will not agree with experimental observations. Only if you say, okay, I can't ever know where that particle is as it's traversing the space between the slits and the gun and the detector. There is no way for me to trace that trajectory. All I can do is I can say there's a certain probability that it's going to be found here, 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 or here when it is measured. If I don't proceed on that basis, I can't do physics that works. So the answer to your question is, how do we know? We know because this computer works. And if quantum mechanics was wrong, if there really were hard little balls down there, this computer wouldn't work.
Now, I have quite a few more questions, but I want to give William a chance to jump in here and ask you some questions. Then I'll come back afterwards and ask you some more. Can you hear us, William? I think you're muted. Go ahead.
Y'all able to hear me there?
Yeah.
Okay. This is really, really fascinating, Rick. It's a pleasure to be able to dialogue with you. The film you've put out is, I can't emphasize how incredibly well done it is. I'm going to probably have to see it multiple times.
Definitely. Everybody will. Same with the principle, man. You cannot just watch this once.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
We have no other way.
And there's nothing wrong. Yeah,
we have to make it interesting enough and
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
enough and moving enough that you will want to watch it. Just watch it once a year for 5 years. Believe me, the light bulb
Yeah.
will go on.
And I really appreciate you bringing Wolfgang Smith. By the way, you were noting. I think you said before the show and during the show. I believe he's 90 years old. He looks incredible for 90.
It's amazing. I mean,
Wow.
he's such a remarkable man in so many ways.
Oh,
But you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's argued. I mean, I don't know which one of us is in better shape, me at 62 or him at 90.
I was going to say, he looks very good.
Oh, no, he's something else, man. He's a remarkable man.
And he's made a number of very interesting comments. And one that I find very, very interesting is, and I'm going to go ahead and briefly quote him, where he says, and he's right, we are told dogmatically that evolution is an established fact. My question for you, Rick, maybe you can help me out. When did this occur? When did it become almost kind of an unspoken dogma that you'd be viewed down upon and you'd be looked at as a wacko if you didn't jump on the evolution bandwagon? Because Wolfgang Smith goes further. He says, we are told often enough the doctrine is founded upon evidence, and then that indeed this evidence is henceforward above all verification. But he makes a very good point. We're left entirely in the dark on the crucial question wherein precisely this evidence consists. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. See, Wolfgang comes from perhaps the absolute pinnacle generation of science.
Yeah.
This was the generation right after the war, the first generation after the quantum founders. I mean, Wolfgang was taught by people who studied with Werner Heisenberg. This was at the absolute peak of rigor of the scientific enterprise. And these guys were taught to a level of rigor that we can't even imagine today.
Yeah.
The scientific method was absolutely well understood to that generation, just as it is not at all understood today, not even a little bit.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and even Einstein understood this, he said, no amount of experimentation can ever prove me right. A single experiment can prove me wrong. Now that is the glory. That is the glory of science. Science can never, ever, ever prove anything. It can only disprove. And it can only do that in one precise way, by an experiment that tests a given hypothesis, a critical experiment. If the experiment goes one way, well, the hypothesis lives to fight another day. It's not proven. It just lives to fight another day. But if the experiment falsifies the hypothesis, that's it. Back to the drawing board, Charlie.
Yeah.
This is precisely the kind of rigor that has always been lacking in evolutionary biology. There has never been a sense that, okay, what are the critical predictions of the Darwin theory? That if we took them into a lab and we tested them, we could potentially falsify the theory.
Yeah.
They just haven't approached it that way. It really never was a scientific theory. It was a metaphysical worldview cloaked in the garb of science, but never subjected to the kind of rigor that the physicists would apply to a theory. You just don't have that kind of an approach to Darwinism. Darwinism is dedicated to propping itself up even in the face of contrary experimental outcomes. Physics, back when Wolfgang was in school, was all about subjecting your theory to critical tests, and if it fails that test, back to the drawing board.
That is a very good point, and fantastic points you made. A number of them there, Rick. Another thing that you brought up in the film that I was quite fascinated about, because I've read quite a bit about it, and I've not done the amount of research you have, but you briefly touch upon the multiverse. What are your for people that may be watching, maybe tuning in, that will say, well, What is a multiverse? What are your thoughts on that? Is it a reality? Is it merely a hypothesis? What can you say about the multiverse?
It's a cry for help.
Yeah.
Let me explain. The multiverse is now found at both extremes in science. In cosmology, they have determined that this universe cannot be generated by any known physical process.
Right.
It's too finely tuned. Things fit together in such a way that just screams design. And they can't stand design. They can't allow design because that lets God in the door. And they certainly aren't going to allow that. So in order to get around this, why do we have such an unlikely universe? Well, there's only two answers to that question. Number one, it really is unlikely. It really is design. Can't have that, right? All right. So what's the other alternative? Well, maybe if this is just one universe out of an infinity of other ones, it's like winning the lottery, don't you see? If there's enough of the universes, one of them is going to turn out to be the jackpot universe, and we happen to live in the jackpot universe. Okay. Is there any evidence whatsoever of any of these other universes? Well, of course not. How could there be? A separate universe is separate precisely because no signal of any kind can even in theory go from one to the other. So how can science tell us about a universe that by definition can never be measured or observed? Well, the mathematics, you see. Our mathematics shows that if you get a big bang, right? Well, then you're going to get more big bangs. It'll just keep big banging along forever and ever and ever. Hallelujah, amen. And sooner or later, you're going to get a universe that looks like this one. Isn't that brilliant? Well, in fact, no, it's not brilliant. In fact, it's desperate. It's a cry for help. It is the application of mathematics to cover the failure of physics to experimentally arrive at the universe that we see. So that's the multiverse on the large scale. Now, down at the other end of the scale in quantum mechanics, why is it that every time we measure a quantum system, it collapses down to one specific value? What happened to all those other values that were just as good or almost as good in the Schrodinger equation? According to the Schrodinger equation, every branch of the wave function has a certain probability. What happens to all the rest of them, right? Well, how about all of the branches actually exist? It's just that when we measure, we split one branch off from all the others, and the universe itself splits into as many copies of itself as there were possible outcomes of that measuring. Well, what evidence do we have of this? Well, again, none whatsoever. Have you ever noticed the universe splitting when you blink your eyes? Have you ever noticed that every time you go into the laboratory and you do a measurement on a photon that the universe splits off? Of course not. There is no evidence of this. So again, where does it come from? It comes from the mathematics, right?
Yeah.
If there is nothing special about this world where the needle points to this value, which we couldn't predict, no quantum measurement is predictable until you've made it. There are probabilities associated with it, but you can never tell what that photon's going to do, what that electron's going to do until you measure it. That makes this world special, doesn't it? Because out of all the possible worlds, that photon picked this value, that location. That makes our world special. Can't have that.
Yeah.
Because then we're back to that whole problem of, well, maybe we are living in a world that's unique and special and designed. And again, that brings us to the dreaded God word, right?
Yep.
Can't have that. So instead, we will simply propose that there is no wave function collapse. That instead, it is us splitting off into millions and millions of copies of ourselves Every single time we blink, we are collapsing the wave functions of all of the photons and electrons in that wall over there on that lamp. Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of universes splitting off every time we blink our eyes. It's an absurdity. That's my opinion.
Yeah. And I wonder what you're on a related kind of spectrum, what your thoughts would be. Do you think that embracing this kind of ideology, really just saying, you know what, I'm completely on board with evolution, do you think that that would lead to a partial or even a complete denial of the scriptures as a whole? Because the majority,
there's no question about that. Yeah. Look, it's very simple here. Now, essentially, there are many people who are very committed to teaching our young people that there's really no conflict, you see, between the scriptures and evolutionary theory. And they're lying. Okay, I'm sorry if they have funny hats and miters and some kind of an authority. I'm afraid that doesn't change the fact that they're lying. And I will prove that they are lying right now. Okay. If we open up the scriptures to the very first book, the very first chapter, the very first verse, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," which means the earth is present at the beginning of the creation. It's the first thing present, other than the heavens, right?
Yep.
Now, what these people telling us that evolution does not conflict with the scriptures require us to believe is that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth actually means, when you get right down to it, in the beginning God created the heavens, and then approximately 9 billion years later the earth. There is no squaring that circle.
No.
Both of those statements cannot be true, and the horribly ill-fated attempt to re-understand Revelation in terms that are acceptable to the modern scientific Darwinian worldview has been a catastrophe for the church. It has been a catastrophe for our children, they are smart enough to know that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth does not in fact mean the same thing as in the beginning God created the heavens and 9.5 billion years later the earth. To attempt to bomb fog them, to insist that they really don't conflict, is an act of intellectual dishonesty and, frankly, cowardice. And no wonder we're chasing them away.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, because I know you have done a tremendous amount of work on this as well, but wouldn't it also run contrary to the mind of the overwhelming consensus of the church fathers as well?
Oh, absolutely. You can't find a church. There is no, Bob Sungenis has done the absolute stupendous work on this. He has gone back and looked at the entirety of the record of the church fathers. Now, what you often hear here is that, oh, no, there was St. Augustine, and he didn't.
You do hear that often. Why is that?
Oh, yeah. You hear it all the time, and it's complete baloney.
Yeah.
It's complete nonsense.
Because I've never found I've looked, Rick, but I've never found the supposed quotes that would lead me to believe that Augustine taught contrary, that taught what these people are proposing.
Absolutely.
What are you talking about?
The only thing Augustine says is that maybe the 6 days were all one day.
Right.
In other words, it's shorter, not longer.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit with their narrative. Yep.
No, of course. There is no hint. See, evolution and long ages were known, just as heliocentrism itself was known way back in the ancient world. It's not like people weren't aware that this was an idea that was out there. It just was rejected because it was contrary to Scripture. And every father knew that it was contrary to Scripture, including St. Augustine, by the way.
Yeah.
And consequently, it was unknown to the Catholic tradition. And when it was reintroduced in the middle of the 19th century by Darwin, it was fully recognized as an assault on Catholic revelation by everyone, just as heliocentrism was recognized as an assault on Catholic revelation by everyone. But the stuffing had been kicked out of us by that time so badly by Newton that they just didn't have the stomach for the fight. And unfortunately, the orders, particularly the Jesuit order, just decided that it was time to start finding a way to get along and to re-understand and reimagine, if you will, the revelation that we have received from Christ and the apostles and the fathers, to reimagine that in a way that is going to allow us to reinterpret that revelation according to the modern scientific enterprise. And the irony, guys, they're doing this just as the scientific narrative is falling apart all over the place.
Yeah.
Darwinism is in crisis.
Rick,
Cosmology, Big Bang cosmology in crisis.
Did you say the Jesuits, Rick?
Yep.
What a shocker.
Yeah. No. It's here's the problem, and Wolfgang has talked about this many, many times. There was a time when the most brilliant minds always chose the church.
Oh yeah.
If you were the genius in the family, you were sent off to the Dominicans, or the Jesuits weren't around at that point.
Yeah.
But one of the orders would take you, and if you were going to
Franciscans, Dominicans, yeah.
Yeah. If you were going to be a truly educated man, a man educated into the elite, you went to the church for that. The church was in possession of the knowledge and resources to educate the absolute elite minds. And so,
Rick, let me ask you this, Rick. I'm sorry for interrupting, but do you see a comeback in that regard in the church?
Absolutely.
Is there a movement? Will it happen in our lifetimes?
It's called the Philosophia Initiative Foundation. I am its president, and
Awesome.
Wolfgang Smith is its chairman. All
Awesome.
we are doing, now that we have the film done, all that we are doing from now on is identifying young minds wherever we can find them in the world.
Awesome.
And preparing them for this awesome moment in history where the great scientific narrative is collapsing and the discovery of vertical causation restores that hierarchical cosmos. For the first time in 700 years, we have a better argument than the materialists do. Because with Wolfgang, every legitimate discovery of physics is perfectly preserved. Wolfgang accepts the validity of quantum mechanics right down to the bone.
Yeah.
Science doesn't have to give up a single one of its actual accomplishments. What they do have to give up, and boy, they're going to fight tooth and nail, they have to give up on the idea that physics can describe the entire world, because it manifestly can't.
Rick, I think thank you very much for your comments. I have to go in a little bit, and I still have a few more minutes, but I wanted to come on to dialogue with you for a bit and to tell you that you're a breath of fresh air. I really appreciate what you're doing. I really like what you're doing. I really enjoy the film, and I know Michael and myself would do a heck of a job helping you promote that and get the word out.
I appreciate it. William,
yeah,
thank you so much. Great questions, really.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you enjoyed the time. Listen, stick with this. Stick with this just like you would the principle. This is deep stuff. This is meat, not milk. This is not something that you're going to get in one sitting.
Right.
But
like Michael said, I'm going to have to watch it more than once.
Watch it more than once. You got to buy it. You got to have it in your library. Because look at what happened with the principle. 5 years ago, we were the craziest. We tricked the poor physicists, and now every single headline that you see in cosmology is confirming what the principle told you 5 years ago. Same thing with this movie. We worked very hard to make sure we are way ahead of the ball game. Give it a chance. Watch it. Read. Just follow the Philosophia Initiative. You're going to find out that the ball game has changed in a way that we haven't seen in at least 400 years.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Rick, I want to ask you some more questions. Descartes comes up in the documentary. Now, could you maybe explain to us how do some of the presuppositions of Descartes impact quantum physics today? You've kind of touched on this earlier, but if you could maybe make it explicit, tied to
Yeah,
Descartes.
it all really starts with him, according to Wolfgang Smith. If you watch the film, there's a wonderful animation where Descartes is sitting in this beautiful garden, and there's these beautiful colors, and the birds are singing, and all of the qualities that make life beautiful, right? But can't be reduced to an equation. This is the big problem that the philosophers faced back at the beginning of the scientific age. We have these wonderful equations that can tell us about how planets move and cannonballs fly and feathers fall, but they can't tell us about why the grass is green, and they can't tell us about why the song is beautiful. What are we going to do with all that? Descartes' great idea was to just banish everything that could not be described mathematically to the realm of the mind. So the world for Descartes, and you see it in the film where all the colors are sucked out of the world and kind of go into his mind, and what's left is like a computer representation of just the lengths and heights and weights. Well, that's the perfect world for the physicist, isn't it? Nothing that can't be reduced to an equation is left in that world. And everything that can't be reduced to an equation is banished to a subjective realm of the mind. And this is the famous res extensa, the realm of extended things, the stripped down world where there's only length and width and breadth and height and mathematical quantities. Everything else, the colors, the sounds, the textures, all of these things that make the world beautiful for us are stripped out, and they are suddenly demoted to a res cogitans, a realm of the mind. Everything that the physicists can't reduce to an equation is banished from the world and becomes subjective, part of the res cogitans. It was a brilliant approach. I mean, it creates a world perfect for physics, except it also banishes ultimately so much of reality outside the realm of physics that ultimately they lead themselves to the dead end that they are at today.
Okay, and explain to me maybe how when we banish color and things like that from the extended realm, as you put it, how does that lead to problems today? Kind of walk me
Well,
through
what
that.
it means is that there's really no red in the world, and
Okay.
there's no texture in the world. There's no song of that bird. It's not beautiful. The clouds are not lovely. These are all subjective functions of the mind, and of course, over time, it gets even worse because at the time of Descartes, they still believed in things like soul, and they still believed in things like God, and they still believed in things like spirit, right? Well, needless to say, once you have thrown away everything that makes the world beautiful and charming and human, you would go forward a few generations and all of a sudden, well, what do we need this thing mind for? I can't write an equation for the mind either, so why should we even? Let's just say that the mind is just neurons firing in my brain, and that everything that I perceive that's got color or any of the qualities, any of the things that make life charming and beautiful, these are all simply the illusions, if you will, cast upon the world by our thinking apparatus. Now you have modernity and its insanities wide open. In other words, there is no reality to be discovered beyond that of the physicist.
Now, let me also ask you this: you said that it was released, in January, but COVID interfered with some of
Yeah,
that, and there was
yeah,
also
true.
additional release in May. Has there been any reviews from the
Yeah.
scientific community? What
Oh
are
no,
they
no,
saying?
no, 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 no,
Oh,
no,
that's not-
no.
gotcha.
Oh no. Let me explain. When we made The Principle, about 8 months before that film came out, we were the most, we were, I think, the third highest trending story on the World Wide Web. There was an international media campaign oh, this film, they've tricked the scientists and they've edited them up to make them sound like they believe in geocentrism. And we were just subjected to this monumental fake news campaign. We were fake news before fake news was fake news. This was back in 2014. And of course, it worked like a charm because they reached about 200 million people and we reached about 200,000 people until the film came out. Now, when the film came out, a very interesting thing happened. Absolutely everyone who sees The Principle and then goes back and reads the stories that were published about it before it's released realizes that they were lied to, that the media was lying completely and obviously. Mm-hmm. And this embarrassed them very substantially. I mean, some of the people in the film made really stupid public comments. Mm-hmm. And I can understand why. I mean, let's say a reporter from the New York Times calls you up and says, hey, Michael, I hear you're in a movie that says that the Earth is the center of the universe. And how in the world could you possibly allow yourself to... Are you really going to tell us you think that's true? What are you going to do if you have a job and a family? Right. And, well, you're going to say stupid things to get yourself off the hook. Well, that's what they all did. And then we came out with our response, which is available on the Principle website under the, it's a little 20-minute documentary called Thought Crime that we did on Michael Boris's show. And we showed that each and every one of these claims was absolutely ridiculous. Then people would see the film. Now, over 1 million people have now seen The Principle. That embarrassment was such that it became very clear that they were not going to touch this one with a 10-foot pole. Why? Well, they were always attacking Bob Sungenis. Oh, he's this, oh, he's that, oh, he doesn't really have a degree. Well, it's really easy to poke at Bob Sungenis in this. It's a whole lot harder to poke at Wolfgang Smith, who has absolutely platinum credentials. And besides which, the resolution of the quantum enigma that he proposes is absolutely devastating to the entire scientific enterprise. Once Catholics finally figure out what Wolfgang Smith has really done, we no longer are playing defense. We are no longer worrying about losing our kids. The atheists are going to be worried about losing theirs. So that's why you want to keep your eyes on the Philosophia Initiative and upon Wolfgang Smith in the years to come. Because for the first time in 400 years, we have a better answer for why the world is the way that it is.
Now, you also talk about Albert Einstein a little bit in the documentary. Can you maybe explain to us, what does he have to do with any of this? Where does he factor into this?
Well, the most important thing for Albert is he never accepted quantum mechanics. He was terribly disturbed by quantum mechanics. And there was the famous debate between Einstein and Niels Bohr at, I believe, the 1926 or 27 Solvay conference, where Einstein put forward what he considered to be a killer headshot against quantum mechanics. And he showed that if quantum mathematics was correct, it would inevitably involve what he called spooky action at a distance. In other words, two particles would be able to exhibit behaviors that would violate the speed of light, that would happen faster than the speed of light. And he called this spooky action at a distance, and he considered himself to have shot quantum mechanics in the head with this argument. Well, he didn't live to see it, but now we have run those experiments. And quantum mechanics is absolutely right, and Albert Einstein is absolutely wrong. So we have a real conflict, and this is one of the big problems in physics right now, is that they refuse to let go of general relativity because it's the system that they use to describe the whole universe. But relativity conflicts with quantum mechanics, vastly contradicts it. And their problem is they've been trying to find a way to marry these two theories, and they have failed spectacularly. So Wolfgang long ago came to the conclusion that quantum mechanics was the correct, in other words, if you want to do physics, and what your physics is involves a contradiction to quantum mechanics, then all he can do is send you his condolences. You're doomed. And since it has become quite apparent to Wolfgang that the conflict between general relativity, special relativity, and quantum mechanics is insoluble, there's no way to resolve these two theories. Wolfgang says that it is Einstein who must necessarily fall.
Now, let me ask a couple chat questions here that I'm saying, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This one's somewhat related enough. Do you think there's a way to make sense of the Bible and of the mystic experience of saints like Hildegard without accepting the ancient cosmology?
Well, it's pretty hard to accept St. Hildegard.
Right.
I mean, that is essentially the content of St. Hildegard. It's her vision of the order of the cosmos. Now, I mean, I don't want to overstate the case here. I'm not a specialist in St. Hildegard. I know two very brilliant men who are, one of whom is Robertson Janus. And I would certainly not go any further than just an interested lay Catholic. I was not persuaded of the validity of the Catholic cosmology by St. Hildegard. I was persuaded of it by physics. I was persuaded by a 10-year examination of the latest cosmological surveys. But for years and centuries, Catholic mystics have feasted upon St. Hildegard and her visions. And even though they arrive at that cosmology in a different way than I did, we nonetheless arrive at the same cosmology. I guess I would answer by saying, I strongly suggest that the time has come to give the benefit of the doubt to the Catholic traditions that we have received, rather than giving the benefit of the doubt to the scientific worldview we have all been indoctrinated with. Things have gotten so bad now in particle physics and cosmology and evolutionary biology. Things are so bad now that they are the ones who should be taking a grain of salt anytime they conflict with authoritative and accepted Catholic sources of revelation, even private revelation.
Now, this one is from Daniel. He's asking, do you have any upcoming projects?
That's a great question, Dan. You know, when I finished the principal, I almost died. I was in the hospital, and I swore I would never do one of these again. I'm an old man, and this is a young man's game. This one almost killed me twice. So I swear to you that anytime I think about doing another project, I immediately say, no freaking way. But I said the same thing at the end of the principal. I never will do this again, and here I did it again. My hope is that some young geniuses out there are starting to hear about us, and we're starting to make, as a matter of fact, we have one of them that we're interviewing on the Philosophia page, I think tomorrow, that we found in England. We want to find the young. I want to pass the torch here, man. I might have another one of these in me if, okay, I'm certainly not going to produce it. I'm certainly not going to write it, and I'm certainly not going to narrate it. You know what I might do? I might executive produce it. What does the executive produce? He sits in the hammock with the mint julep and says, "Great job, kid." That I think I could probably get away with. No, I want to find the young geniuses. That's what I'm looking for now. I'm looking for the brilliant young ones.
Yeah. This one is from, let's see, Pictus. Are there any physicists in academia who are willing to engage Dr. Smith's thought?
Oh yeah, there are several. I mean, you can read some of them on the Philosophia website. There's Dr. Ali Sabetci, who teaches physics in Turkey. There's, of course, Dr. Rafael de Paola, who is professor of physics at the Pontifical University in Rio de Janeiro, who is a profound defender of Dr. Smith. Many other physicists spread out throughout the world, more outside the United States than inside the United States. But let me assure you that we reached out to absolutely every prominent physicist who has written on the quantum reality problem or the quantum enigma. Not a single one of them would engage us. And I think that it was probably wise for them, because otherwise what was already an embarrassment for them with the principal would have been an absolute slaughter with Dr. Smith. They're ignoring us as long as they can, and that's fine. They themselves don't know anymore. They don't have the confidence they used to have. I mean, these guys are looking at terrifying outcomes from their LHC experiments, from the recent cosmology surveys. Good Lord. Everything the principal said 5 years ago is being confirmed now in the cosmology surveys. Nope, they're leaving us alone, and that's fine. We'll just grow without them. When they want to pick a fight, here we are. We're ready. Bring it on.
This one is from Ave. What is the evidence that anything other than what is observed could have been the case? So, in other words, how do we know that there's something out there?
Like a multiverse, yeah. Well, no, there is no evidence. There's no evidence in a physical sense or experimental sense. It is from the mathematics. In other words, when we get to things that we can't observe in principle, right? I mean, there is no way to observe a multiverse. There's no experiment that you could ever possibly do, right? There's no way to observe a photon without observing it, right? Without measuring it. And when you measure it, you instantaneously collapse the probabilities down to an actuality, and it disturbs the very act of observing disturbs the system. So how do we know? Well, we only know through our mathematics. And that's a very slippery slope, because Heisenberg and the other founders of quantum mechanics always said the only way to do physics is to use the classical world as your arbiter. In other words, even if your equation shows the particle being in 17 places at once, right? That is only valuable to the extent that when you measure it repeatedly, you find out that, yeah, the probabilities are beautifully expressed in the mathematics. But Heisenberg would never have accepted the idea of a multiverse, because there's nothing we can do to experimentally test that. He never would have accepted many worlds, because he always put a strict line between the quantum world and what he calls the environment, or what Wolfgang calls the corporeal world, the world in which we live and move and have our being. The short answer to your question is only by accepting mathematics as supreme above experiment. And that's exactly what the physics theorists are doing now. And that's, I submit, exactly why they are reaching dead ends all over the map.
This one is, how is vertical causation related to love, justice, and other abstract universals?
Well, precisely because if these things emanate not from the neurons that are shooting around in our brains, but are apprehensive of a part of reality that actually exists, but cannot be reduced to the forms of horizontal causation known to physics. In other words, if I take a rock in one hand, right, and I take, I take a rock, right, and I hold the rock up. Now there's two guys looking at that rock. One of them is, some savage, right, and he sees a rock. The other one is a mining engineer, and he sees ore. Now, is there any difference in the physical configuration of that rock? No. But if you don't think there's a difference in the apprehension of it by the two, just wait and see which one can build a sword, right? So there is something happening in the world of thought, in the world of intellect, that is physically measurable. It's there. It's for sure real. But it doesn't reduce to differential equations. It is operating above the world of the physicist, and therefore Wolfgang calls it vertical. And not only is the quantum measurement problem an example of vertical causation, the act of intellectually apprehending an idea, a universal, is an act of vertical causation.
And that also answers the next question, because Hugo was asking for you to define Dr. Smith's concept of vertical causality. So that takes care of that. I have another question for you. You were talking about, there's going to be other outlets that you're going to be bringing this documentary to. Sounded like you were saying there may be some more theatrical avenues.
Well, we're going to do screenings. We hope to do screenings. We're not going to go back into theaters because that business is essentially over. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know if it's ever coming back, but
Yeah.
but certainly we're not interested in going back. What we would hope for is that as the film becomes more widely appreciated for what it really is. I mean, I'm not a neutral observer, obviously. So take this with a grain of salt, by all means. But it is a very important film. This man is a genius. He's a world historical genius, comparable in what his ultimate impact will be to Copernicus. He has the power in his work to change the world as profoundly as Copernicus has, in the opposite direction. And because of this, I am very confident that this film will last a very long time. I made it so that it would not have an expiration date.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am correct about that, I hope that as we come back from COVID and we start getting together again, that there will be places that are willing to sponsor special screenings, even ones where I can come out and address the audience. We have high hopes that will in fact be occurring.
And are there any plans maybe for something like Netflix or Hulu or other streaming
Yeah. Well,
services?
the problem with Netflix, of course, is that the principal had Kate Mulgrew as its narrator.
Oh, yeah.
Kate Mulgrew, at the time she narrated The Principal, was the star of Netflix's #1 show, Orange is the New Black. And when The Principal was targeted for media destruction, Kate, of course, was forced to humiliate herself by issuing a statement assuring her she had absolutely no idea what the film was about. And if she would have only known, she never would have done it. She had the script 3 months before we hired her, for God's sake. I mean, how humiliating is that? But the point is Netflix hates us with a pure, distilled essence of hatred that, and they should. I mean, the world that they are attempting to promote is subjected to the most dangerous possible assault by the films we make. Never the twain shall meet. If I were in Netflix, I would certainly never play this film. We're too dangerous. Both this film and The Principal are way too dangerous for the mainstream. Fortunately, we're reaching millions of people through the non-mainstream opportunities that the internet provides us. We've sold copies of The End of Quantum Reality in 36 countries in the first month. I mean, we're doing all right. I mean, they can keep their mainstream. I would be worried if Netflix would show one of my films. I would think I made a mistake somehow.
I hear you. There really is a lot of Christians out there who are interested in support
and
this.
They have kids, and they want their kids to be protected from this awful world that they see descending. We have the weapons. We can prepare your kids to stand up and win, not just defend, but to go on to offense and win the world. And that's why I hope everyone will bookmark the Philosophia Initiative. If you have homeschooling kids and you aren't in touch with us, you better get in touch with us, because we are going to do some big things in that regard in the coming year.
How do we get our hands on the film and The Principal?
Well, both of them have their own websites. For The Principal, it's theprincipalmovie.com. And by the way, it's PRINCIPLE, not PAL. Theprincipalmovie.com. And for us, it's theendofquantumreality.com. You can pick them both up today, and I highly recommend you do. And by the way, get some for your friends too, and get some for Christmas. These two films, well, The Principal, I mean, look, honest to gosh, that film was put out 5 years ago, and it is absolutely a prophetic film. It's amazing how essentially every major point that we addressed in that film has now been confirmed by the scientific mainstream. And I'm confident that the same thing's going to happen in spades with the end of quantum reality. So both films should be in every serious Catholic's library, especially if you have kids coming up.
Excellent. And I'm going to put a link again also in the description at the bottom.
I appreciate it. I see it down at the bottom of the screen right now. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And hey, any other plugs that you want to put in? I know you're not working on any other projects, but anything else? Go ahead.
Well, you know, we're working very hard. I'm not quite ready to plug it yet because I haven't raised the money for it yet. But I'm very close to announcing two very important initiatives for next year. And I can say right now that the film is out and one other project we're not quite ready to announce, but once these are done, everything that we do is going to be geared toward finding, identifying, and assisting young minds to become what we were 700 years ago, the best, because we now have the best argument. Now we need to train the young minds who can go out and take the high ground, the intellectual high ground in this rapidly disintegrating civilization. The time is at hand. The time of the great reversal is at hand, and we encourage all parents who think that they have a child with some potential to be educated at this level. We want to know about it. We want to help. And God willing, we've found the support to at least be seriously talking about launching some pretty significant programs in that regard over the next year.
Some really exciting stuff. Look, I wish you the best of luck. I cannot say any, I can't say it any more strongly. This is an amazing documentary. It's extremely well done. It's very, very intriguing. It backs up Aristotelian and Thomistic philosophy. Can't get any better than that. And of course, I mean, this is featuring a guy who is an outrageously qualified individual in both science and philosophy. So you really outdid yourself.
Thanks a million, Mike. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. And I'm so glad that we were able to chat today. And look, as we move forward here, I hope we'll have the opportunity to mention some of these things we're working on behind the scenes, not quite ready to pop out yet, but certainly to all of your audience, thank you so much for your support of Mike and others whose apostolates are so important. Now that the world is really starting to turn on us, those who have set up the means for us to be in touch and to spread the ideas, this is going to be a great time for the church, a great time for the church, and a great time for those parents who refuse to surrender the innocence of their children to the scientific Goliath and to the awful cultural perversions. We're going to be very small, but we're going to get very strong, and then we're going to grow like you can't believe. It's an incredibly exciting time to be a believer and a servant of Jesus Christ and his blessed Virgin Mother.
Well said. And everybody, again, go to theendofquantumreality.com. I'll put a link at the description once this post. Go support Rick and what he's doing there. And also, if you haven't seen it already, go check out The Principal. I mean,
definitely, man. The Principal it's absolute. These two films are absolutely bookends.
They're kind of, they're both. Because one is dealing with the big stuff, one is dealing with the small stuff. So,
well, in many ways, I have to tell you that this film could never have happened without Bob Sungenis and his brilliant, courageous. He made The Principal happen. I mean, he was the guy that made that happen. That was his idea. He raised the money. He fought through all the. So yeah, definitely. Give Bob a call. Buy a couple of copies of The Principal. Buy 10 of them for Christmas. It's a great movie, man.
Yeah, check them both out. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on, Rick. You're welcome on anytime. Anything else that you want to discuss, come on the show and let's do it.
Love to be back when I've got some when I firm a couple of things up. You know, a few months down the line, I'd love
Let's
to
do
do
it.
that.
Let's do it. Well, everyone, thank you
Thanks,
for
Michael.
watching.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Go check out Rick. Everyone, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, share this on your social media. Until next time, God bless.